The wind cut sharp across the grasslands, carrying with it the scent of sage and distant rain. The sky burned copper and gold as the sun began its slow descent behind the mesas, painting the world in shades of amber and blood. A lone rider moved through this dying light, her silhouette carved against the horizon like something born from the earth itself. She rode with the kind of ease that came not from practice but from belonging, her body moving with the horse as though they shared one heartbeat, one breath. Aiyana was her name, though few beyond her people knew it. Daughter of the chief, keeper of traditions older than memory, she carried herself with a pride that made men lower their eyes and women whisper blessings as she passed. Her skin held the warmth of desert sand, her hair the darkness of moonless nights. But it was her eyes that marked her as dangerous, eyes that had witnessed too much, remembered everything, and forgave nothing. She had watched the white men come with their wagons and their promises, watched them take the land her grandmothers had walked, watched them draw lines where no lines had ever been. And she had sworn, with the fierceness of a prayer and the weight of a vow, that she would never bow to them. She would never need them, and she would certainly never love one of them. The universe, however, has always delighted in humbling the proud. The storm came without warning, as desert storms often do, rolling across the plains like a living thing, hungry and violent. What had been a clear evening turned black within minutes, the wind rising from whisper to roar, bringing with it sheets of rain that struck like thrown stones. Aiyana urged her horse forward, searching for shelter, but the usually sure-footed animal stumbled on the rain-slicked rocks near the river's edge. The fall was quick and brutal. She hit the ground hard, felt something in her shoulder twist wrong, and before she could rise, the floodwaters were upon her. The river, usually a gentle ribbon of silver through the valley, had transformed into a churning beast. It grabbed her with cold fingers, pulled her under, spun her until she lost all sense of up or down. Her lungs burned, her vision darkened. And in that moment, facing death in the embrace of water and mud, she thought perhaps this was fitting. Better to die here, in the land of her people, than to live diminished. But then there were hands, strong and certain, gripping her arms. Someone pulled her up through the current, fighting against the flood's hunger. She broke the surface gasping, coughing up river water, and through her blurred vision saw the face of her rescuer. A white man, a cowboy. By the look of his worn hat and weathered coat, he dragged her toward the bank, his jaw set with determination, his eyes focused only on keeping them both alive. When they finally collapsed on solid ground, both of them shaking and drenched, Aiyana's first instinct was fury. She tried to push him away, to stand on her own, but pain shot through her injured shoulder and she fell back with a gasp. The man did not touch her again. He simply rose to his feet, water streaming from his clothes, and said in a voice roughened by the storm, "My ranch is close. You need shelter." She wanted to refuse. Pride demanded it. But the cold was already settling into her bones, and the storm showed no signs of mercy. So she nodded once, sharp and resentful, and allowed him to help her onto his horse. The ranch house was small and plain, built from timber and stone with the practical eye of someone who valued function over beauty. Inside, it was warmer than she expected, a fire already burning low in the hearth. The man, Luke Carter, as she would later learn, moved through the space with quiet efficiency. He brought her a blanket, set water to boil, checked the windows against the storm's fury. He did not ask questions. He did not demand gratitude. He simply existed in the space beside her, solid and undemanding as the walls themselves. Aiyana sat near the fire, the blanket wrapped around her shoulders, and studied him with the wariness of a wolf watching a trap. He was tall, built lean and strong from years of hard work. His face carried scars, some old and faded, some newer, and his eyes held a kind of weariness that had nothing to do with age. When he finally met her gaze, she saw no pity there, no superiority, just a quiet recognition of one survivor seeing another. "Coffee," he said, "not kaida question." She nodded again, still unwilling to give him the gift of her voice. He poured 2 cups from a battered pot, handed her one, and took the other for himself. They sat in silence, listening to the storm rage outside, 2 strangers bound together by nothing more than circumstance and the temporary truce of shared survival. But Aiyana could feel something shifting in the air between them, something she could not name and did not want to acknowledge. It was there in the way the firelight caught his profile, softening the hard lines of his face. It was there in the careful distance he maintained, respecting her space even as he offered sanctuary. It was there in the silence itself, which felt less like absence and more like a conversation they were both too afraid to begin. Outside, the wind howled and the rain hammered against the roof. Inside, two worlds sat across from each other, divided by history and blood and everything that could not be spoken. Yet something fragile was beginning to form in that space between them, delicate as spider silk and just as strong. The storm lasted through the night. By morning, the river had receded, but the land remained transformed, carved by water into new patterns. Aiyana woke on a bedroll by the fire, her shoulders stiff but manageable. Luke was already awake, standing at the window with a cup in his hands, watching the changed world with an expression she could not read. "You should rest another day," he said without turning. "That shoulder needs time." "I have rested enough," she replied, speaking to him directly for the first time. Her voice came out harsher than she intended, edged with the defensiveness of someone who had learned that accepting help from certain people always came with a price. He turned then, and something in his eyes made her pause. "No price," he said quietly, as though he had heard her thoughts. "No debt, just a day to heal." She wanted to argue, but exhaustion and pain made a convincing case for staying. Besides, she told herself, one more day meant nothing. It was practical, not surrender. So she settled back against the wall and watched him move through his morning routine, tending the fire, checking supplies, moving with the unhurried rhythm of someone long accustomed to solitude. As the day wore on, she found herself studying him more openly. There was something different about this man, something that did not fit the image of cowboy she had built in her mind. He spoke little, but when he did, his words were careful, chosen with the precision of someone who understood their weight. He offered food without expectation, tended the fire without performance. And most surprisingly, he did not ask about her people, her life, or why she had been riding alone through dangerous country. It was only in the evening, when the sun painted the sky in familiar golds and crimsons, that he finally spoke of more than practical things. They were sitting on the porch, watching the light fade, when he said, almost to himself, "I knew an Apache man once." "In the war?" Aiyana stiffened, waiting for the story she had heard too many times. The one where the white man proved himself superior, wiser, more civilized. But Luke's story went differently. "We had captured some of your warriors," he continued, his voice flat with old pain. "Orders came down to execute them. No trial, no questions. Just bullets." He paused, his hands gripping the porch rail until his knuckles went white. "I refused. Said I would not shoot unarmed men, no matter whose side they fought for." "What happened?" The question escaped her before she could stop it. "They beat me, called me a traitor, an Indian lover, discharged me without honor." He turned to look at her then, and she saw in his eyes the same kind of exile she carried in her own heart. "I have been running from that decision ever since. Or maybe running toward it. Hard to tell sometimes." Something cracked open inside Aiyana's chest, something she had kept sealed and protected for years. This man, this white man, had sacrificed his place in his world for the sake of mercy. He had chosen honor over belonging, principle over safety, and it had cost him everything, just as her own choices had cost her. "Your kindness does not erase the blood on this land," she said, but the words came out softer than she intended, more question than accusation. "No," he agreed. "It does not. Nothing can. But maybe, just maybe, there is space between erasing and repeating. A place where we can be something other than enemies." The silence that followed was different from the night before. It held possibility now, fragile and dangerous as new spring ice. Aiyana felt it settling around them, and part of her wanted to flee, to ride away before this thing between them could take root and grow into something she could not control. But she stayed. One more day, she told herself. Just one more day. The days began to blend together, each one finding a reason to extend her stay. Her shoulder needed more healing. The trails were still dangerous with mud. There were signs of bandits in the area. Excuses piled upon excuses, and beneath them all, The truth, neither of them would speak. They were not ready to part. Luke taught her things without seeming to teach, showing her how he mended fences, how he tracked deer through the pine forest, how he read the sky for weather. In return, Aiyana found herself sharing stories of her people, the old ways, the songs that carried memory from generation to generation. She showed him how to find water where there seemed to be none, how to read the language of birds, how to move through the world with respect rather than dominance. They were learning each other's languages, not just of words, but of seeing, of being. And with each lesson, the walls between them grew thinner. It was Luke who finally broke the careful distance they had maintained. 3 weeks after the storm, as they worked together to repair a section of the barn roof, he said, "You could stay, you know, if you wanted." Aiyana froze, hammer in hand. "Stay? Here, on the ranch." He kept his eyes on the boards he was nailing, but she could see the tension in his shoulders. "Not as, I mean, just as, if you need it." He stopped, frustrated with his own stumbling words. "I am saying this badly." "Yes," she agreed, fighting the smile that wanted to break free. "You are." He finally looked at her then, and the vulnerability in his face made her breath catch. "I am alone here, Aiyana, have been for years. And I find that, for the first time since the war, I do not want to be alone anymore." The hammer slipped from her fingers, clattering against the roof. She should say no. She should remind him of everything that made this impossible. Her people, his people, the blood and history and hate that stood between their worlds. She should climb down from this roof, mount her horse, and ride until the memory of his eyes faded from her mind. Instead, she reached out and touched his face, her fingertips tracing the scar that ran from his temple to his jaw. "I do not know how to do this," she whispered. "Neither do I," he replied. And then he kissed her, gentle and uncertain, as though she were made of smoke and might disappear at any moment. The world did not end. The sky did not fall. They simply stood there on that half-repaired roof, two people who had spent their lives being told they were enemies and chose instead to be something else. But peace, Aiyana knew, was never allowed to last. The soldiers came on a cold morning in early autumn. 6 of them, led by a lieutenant with cold eyes and a voice like breaking glass. They had heard, he said, that Luke was harboring an Apache woman. This was suspicious. This required investigation. Aiyana was inside when she heard the horses. She moved to the window and felt her blood turn to ice. Luke was already outside, positioning himself between the house and the soldiers, his stance calm but ready. "She is a guest," Luke said, his voice carrying clearly in the crisp air. "Under my protection." The lieutenant laughed, a sound without humor. "Your protection? Carter, you are barely tolerated in this county as it is. The Indian lover who got discharged. You really think your word means anything?" "I think my word is all that matters on my land." "Your land." The lieutenant spat in the dirt. "You might have bought this patch of dust, but you do not make the laws here. That woman comes with us. Orders are orders." "No." The single word hung in the air, heavy with consequence. Aiyana watched the soldiers exchange glances, saw hands drift toward weapons. She could not let Luke die for her. Would not. She moved toward the door, ready to surrender herself, but before she could open it, violence erupted outside. The lieutenant struck first, a vicious blow that sent Luke staggering. The other soldiers joined in, fists and boots, and though Luke fought back with the skill of a trained soldier, he was outnumbered and overwhelmed. Aiyana burst through the door, screaming, throwing herself into the fray, but strong hands grabbed her, held her back, forced her to watch as they beat the man who had dared to protect her. It was the lieutenant who finally called a halt, breathing hard, his knuckles bloody. "String him up," he ordered. "Leave him as a warning to anyone else who thinks harboring savages is acceptable." Something inside Aiyana snapped. She had watched her people die. She had watched her land stolen. She had watched injustice parade itself as law too many times to count. But this she would not watch. She went limp in the hands that held her, then twisted with a speed that caught them off guard. Her elbow connected with someone's throat. Her foot swept another's legs. She grabbed a rifle from one of the fallen soldiers and fired a shot into the air, the report echoing like thunder across the valley. "The next one goes through someone's heart," she said, her voice deadly calm. "Choose who dies first." The soldiers froze, uncertain. She was one woman against 6 men, but she held the gun with the ease of someone who knew how to use it, and her eyes promised that she would not hesitate. "Leave," she commanded. "Now, or I start shooting, and your families receive bodies instead of letters." The lieutenant's face went purple with rage, but he was not stupid. He had seen that look before, in the eyes of warriors who had nothing left to lose. He gestured to his men, and they mounted their horses, leaving Luke crumpled in the dirt. "This is not over," the lieutenant promised. "No," Aiyana agreed. "It is not." They waited until the soldiers disappeared over the ridge before she dropped to her knees beside Luke. His face was a mess of blood and bruising, but he was breathing. Alive. "Foolish man," she whispered, tears streaming down her face. "Foolish, brave, impossible man." His eyes fluttered open, unfocused but aware. "Had to," he managed. "Could not let them." "Hush." She pressed her fingers to his lips. "Save your strength. We have to go. They will come back with more." She helped him into the house, gathering supplies with frantic efficiency. They could not stay here. The ranch, which had been a sanctuary, had become a trap. They needed to disappear into the wilderness, where soldiers feared to follow, where her knowledge of the land would keep them alive. By nightfall, they were gone, leaving behind everything Luke had built, everything that tied him to his old life. They rode north toward the mountains, toward Apache territory, toward the only safety Aiyana could offer him now. They traveled for 3 days through terrain that tested even Aiyana's skill. Luke, injured and weakening, clung to the saddle with determination born of sheer will. She led them through hidden canyons and secret paths, places the white men had not yet found and hopefully never would. On the 4th day, they reached the high country, where snow already dusted the peaks and the air grew thin and cold. They found shelter in a cave, one she remembered from childhood, where her grandfather had once taught her to read the stars. She built a fire, tended Luke's wounds with herbs and poultices her mother had taught her to make. He drifted in and out of consciousness, fever-bright and mumbling words she could not quite catch. On the 5th night, the fever broke. He woke clear-headed, his eyes finding her across the firelight with something like wonder. "You saved me," he said. "You saved me first," she replied. "We are even." "No." He struggled to sit up, wincing but determined. "Aiyana, I need to tell you something. Before the war, before everything, I was engaged to a woman in Texas." Her heart clenched, but she kept her face neutral. "What happened?" "She died. Fever took her 2 weeks before the wedding. I thought I died with her, in a way. Thought I would never feel anything again." He reached for her hand, his fingers rough and warm against her palm. "But you brought me back, made me remember what it feels like to care about something beyond just surviving." Aiyana looked down at their joined hands, light and dark, scarred and strong. "This is dangerous. What we are doing. My people will not understand. Yours will hunt us. I know. We have no future, no place we belong." "I know." "Then why?" She looked up at him, tears burning her eyes. "Why choose this path that leads nowhere?" Luke smiled, sad and beautiful. "Because nowhere with you is better than anywhere without you." The words hung between them like a prayer and a promise. Aiyana leaned forward, kissing him with all the fear and hope and desperate love she had been holding back. Outside, the wind howled and the snow began to fall, covering the world in white silence. Inside the cave, beside the fire, 2 people who had lost everything found something worth keeping. Spring came late that year, but when it finally arrived, it brought with it new life. The snow melted into rushing streams. Wildflowers carpeted the meadows. And Aiyana discovered that her body carried a secret that would change everything. She knew before her bleeding failed to come. Knew from the way food smelled wrong, from the tenderness in her breasts, from the subtle changes only a woman's body can recognize. For 3 days, she said nothing, trying to understand what this meant, what choice she had now. Luke noticed, of course. He noticed everything about her. "What is wrong?" he asked one morning, his concern gentle but persistent. She could not lie to him, had never been able to lie to him. I am with child." The silence that followed felt endless. She watched his face, waiting for fear, for regret, for the moment he would realize what a burden she had become. Instead, his eyes filled with something that looked like joy. "A child," he repeated, as though testing the word. "Our child." "This complicates everything," she said, her voice sharp with the fear she would not name. "A child of two worlds, belonging to neither. Do you understand what that means?" "I understand it means we have to be stronger, braver." He took her hands, pulling her close. "Marry me, Aiyana. Let me give this child a name, a home." She laughed then, but it was not a kind sound. "Marry you? What white church would have us? What Apache ceremony would bless this union? You think a piece of paper changes what we are? What people will see when they look at us? I think," he said carefully, "that a strong woman can love whoever she chooses, and that any child born of that love is already blessed, no matter what the world says." His words, so simple and so impossible, broke something inside her. She had spent her whole life being strong, being proud, being unbreakable. But here, in this moment, she allowed herself to be fragile. She allowed herself to hope. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, I will marry you." They married themselves, beneath an oak tree as old as time, with no witnesses but the birds in the sky. Luke spoke vows in English. Aiyana spoke them in Apache. They mixed their blood, old tradition meeting new promise, and bound themselves to each other with words and hope and the child growing between them. For a few weeks, they existed in a bubble of peace. They talked about names, about whether they would have a daughter or a son, about teaching their child to live in both worlds or neither. They built plans on hope and morning light, and almost believed they might work. But peace, Aiyana had learned long ago, was a temporary gift in a world built on conflict. The messenger came on a day that started like any other. A young Apache warrior, someone Aiyana recognized from her father's council, rode into their camp with news that turned her blood to ice. "They know," he said without preamble. "The whole tribe. Someone saw you with the white man. Word reached your father." Aiyana's hand went instinctively to her belly, still flat but already precious. "What does he say?" The warrior's face was grim. "He says you have betrayed your people, taken the enemy into your body, into your blood. He says you are no longer his daughter." The words hit like physical blows. Aiyana had expected anger, had prepared herself for disappointment. But disownment, the complete severing of her tie to her people, to her father, that was a death of a different kind. "I need to speak with him," she said. "He will not see you. He said if you return to the village, you will be cast out publicly, made an example." The child, the warrior hesitated. "He says the child is a pollution, an abomination." Luke stepped forward, his hand on Aiyana's shoulder. "Tell the chief I will come. Tell him I will face whatever judgment he demands, if he will spare Aiyana and the child." The warrior looked at Luke with something between respect and pity. "You do not understand our ways, white man. There is no sacrifice that washes away this sin. You could die 1,000 deaths, and it would not change what she has done." "Then I will die once and at least know I tried." Aiyana turned to him, fury and fear warring in her chest. "No, I will not let you become a martyr for my choices. This is my burden." "It is our burden," Luke corrected gently. "Our child, our choice, our consequence. We face it together or not at all." The warrior shook his head, already turning his horse. "The chief has spoken. Whether you come or not, Aiyana, daughter of the wind, is dead to her people. Only a ghost walks where she once stood." He rode away, leaving them alone with the weight of exile. Aiyana stood motionless, feeling the ground shift beneath her feet. She had lost her father, her people, her identity. Everything that had defined her was gone, leaving only the unknown future and the man beside her. "We will make our own people," Luke said softly. "Our own tribe of two, soon to be three." She wanted to believe him, wanted to think love could replace everything she had lost. But love, she was learning, was both more and less than she had imagined. It filled some holes while creating others. It answered some questions while raising new ones. "Tell me again," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "Tell me this is worth it." Luke pulled her close, his hand covering hers over their unborn child. Every day for the rest of our lives, I will tell you. And someday, maybe you will believe it as much as I do. The months passed in a strange limbo, neither fully hunted nor fully free. They moved often, never staying long enough to put down roots, always watching the horizon for soldiers or warriors who might decide their mixed union was worth ending. Aiyana's belly grew round and heavy, a visible marker of everything they had chosen, everything they had lost. Luke hunted and trapped to feed them. Aiyana gathered plants and prepared their camps with the efficiency of someone raised to survive. They spoke less as time went on, not because they had nothing to say, but because words felt inadequate to the enormity of what they faced. Instead, they communicated through touch, through the small kindnesses that sustained them through the long nights and uncertain days. Winter came early, harsh, and unforgiving. Aiyana's time grew close, and they knew they needed shelter more permanent than what they had been using. Luke found an abandoned homestead, little more than a shack but solid enough to keep out the worst of the cold. They moved in, made it as comfortable as possible, and waited. The baby came on the longest night of the year, when darkness stretched from horizon to horizon and the stars burned cold and distant. Aiyana labored through the night, her cries echoing in the small space, her body racked with pain that was both terrible and transforming. Luke stayed beside her, holding her hand, wiping her brow, whispering encouragements he did not fully believe but needed to say anyway. Just before dawn, when the world hung balanced between darkness and light, their daughter was born. She came into the world screaming, red-faced and furious, already fighting for her place in a world that had no place prepared for her. Luke cut the cord with shaking hands. Aiyana gathered the tiny, squalling body to her chest, feeling a rush of love so fierce it bordered on violence. This child, this impossible, beautiful child, was everything. She was the sum of their choices, the proof of their love, the bridge between two worlds that wanted nothing to do with each other. "What do we call her?" Luke asked, his voice thick with emotion. Aiyana studied her daughter's face, seeing her own features, and Luke's blended into something new, something that belonged only to itself. "Hope," she said finally. "We call her Hope because that is what she gives us." They had 3 weeks of imperfect peace, learning to be parents, marveling at the tiny person who had joined their strange, fractured family. Hope nursed and slept and grew stronger each day, her eyes slowly focusing, her hands learning to grasp. She was perfect and vulnerable and utterly dependent, and they would have died to protect her. The soldiers found them on a gray morning, heavy with the promise of snow. There were more this time, a full patrol, and they surrounded the shack before Luke and Aiyana even knew they were there. The same lieutenant from before kicked open the door, his gun drawn, his face twisted with something that went beyond duty into personal vendetta. "Well," he said, his eyes taking in the scene with cold satisfaction. The rumors were true. Indian lover and his squaw, playing house. And what's this? His gaze fell on Hope, sleeping in her makeshift crib. An abomination to complete the picture. Aiyana moved instinctively between him and the baby, her whole body transformed into a weapon. "Touch her and I will kill you." The lieutenant laughed. "You? One woman? I have 8 men outside and the law on my side. You have nothing." But he was wrong. Aiyana had everything that mattered, and that made her more dangerous than any army. She had something worth dying for, and more importantly, something worth killing for. What happened next occurred too fast for thought, driven by instinct and desperation. Aiyana lunged for Luke's rifle, propped against the wall. The lieutenant fired, but his shot went wide, punching through the wooden wall. Luke threw himself at the officer, grappling for the gun. Outside, shouts erupted as the other soldiers realized the situation had turned violent. Aiyana fired through the window, not aiming to kill but to scatter, to buy them seconds they desperately needed. She grabbed Hope, bundling the screaming baby against her chest, and ran for the back door. Luke was behind her, bleeding from a wound in his side but still moving, still fighting. They made it to the horses, mounted with Hope clutched between them, and rode like demons fleeing hell itself. Bullets kicked up snow around them. Men shouted orders that were swallowed by the wind. But they had surprise and desperation on their side, and sometimes that was enough. They rode north, always north, toward the mountains that marked the boundary of map territory. Behind them, the pursuit continued, relentless and methodical. Luke's wound bled steadily, leaving a trail even a blind man could follow. They both knew they could not run forever. Something had to give. It gave on the third day, when Luke's fever spiked, and he could no longer stay in the saddle. They were deep in the mountains by then, in country so remote even Aiyana struggled to navigate. She found a cave, more a cleft in the rock than true shelter, and pulled Luke inside. Hope whimpered, hungry and cold, and Aiyana tried to nurse her while also tending Luke's wound. His eyes, when they focused on her, held a terrible clarity. "You have to go," he said. "Leave me here. Take Hope, and disappear into your people's lands." "No. Aiyana, please. They are hunting me, not you. Without me, you and Hope have a chance." I said no. She gripped his hand so hard her knuckles went white. "We are a tribe, remember. We stay together." He smiled, weak but real. "Stubborn woman." "Foolish man," she replied, their familiar exchange a lifeline in the chaos. They held each other through that long night, all three of them huddled together against the cold and the fear and the approaching end. Hope slept between them, her small body warm and trusting, unaware of the darkness closing in. But dawn came, as it always does, bringing with it the sound Aiyana had been dreading. Horses, many of them, and the shouts of men who had found their trail. She looked at Luke, saw the resignation in his eyes, and made a decision. "Stay here with Hope," she commanded. "I will lead them away." "You cannot." "I can, and I will." She kissed him, fierce and final. "If I do not come back, tell our daughter about me. Tell her I was proud and free, and that I loved her father more than life itself." Before he could argue, before her courage could fail, she ran from the cave and made herself visible on the ridge above. The soldiers saw her immediately, their shouts turning triumphant. She let them see her clearly, then turned and ran in the opposite direction from the cave, leading them away from her family. The chase was brief and brutal. She was on foot, exhausted, in unfamiliar territory. They ran her down within the hour, surrounding her on a cliff edge with nowhere left to run. The lieutenant dismounted, his face flushed with victory. "Finally," he said. "Justice." Aiyana stood at the cliff's edge, the drop behind her disappearing into mist. She could jump, deny them their moment of triumph, or she could fight, take as many with her as possible. Or she could surrender, hope for mercy she knew they would not grant. She chose none of these. Instead, she smiled, wide and genuine, the first truly free smile she had worn in months. "You think this is justice?" she asked. "You think catching me means you have won?" "It is over," the lieutenant confirmed. "No." Her smile widened. "It is just beginning. Somewhere out there is a child who carries both our bloods. She will grow strong and proud, and she will remember what you tried to do. Your justice is temporary. Our love is forever." Before they could respond, before they could understand what she meant, Aiyana stepped backward off the cliff. She did not die. The mist hit a ledge 10 feet down, one she had spotted in her final scan of the terrain. She landed hard, the breath knocked from her lungs, but alive. Above, she heard shouts of confusion, then the sounds of retreat. They thought her dead, broken at the bottom of the cliff. They would not search for a body in that treacherous terrain. She lay still until silence returned. Then began the painful climb back to the cave. It took hours, her body screaming protest at every movement. But love made her strong, and purpose made her relentless. She reached the cave as the sun began to set, calling out softly so Luke would know it was her. He met her at the entrance, hope in his arms, his face transforming from despair to joy to disbelief. "You are alive. I heard the shots, the shouting. I thought, I know." She touched his face, needing to confirm they were both real. "But I am too stubborn to die. Someone told me that once." They left that night, traveling only by darkness, covering their trail with every trick Aiyana knew. The soldiers had given up the hunt, believing their quarry dead. They had time now, space to breathe, to plan. They traveled for months, drifting like ghosts through the territories, never staying long enough to be remembered. Luke's wound healed slowly, leaving a scar he would carry the rest of his life. Hope grew, transformed from helpless infant to curious child, her eyes taking in everything with fearless wonder. Eventually, they found a place. Not home, not exactly, but something close enough. A valley so remote it appeared on no maps, where a stream ran clear and cold and the meadows burst with wildflowers each spring. They built a cabin there, small but sturdy, and planted a garden that grew despite the short season. They lived carefully, always aware that peace could shatter at any moment. But days turned to weeks, weeks to months, and slowly they began to believe they might actually survive this. Hope learned to walk, then to run, then to speak in the mixed language her parents taught her. Apache and English woven together into something new. She was wild and free, equally comfortable tracking deer with her mother and mending fences with her father. She was their bridge and their hope, proof that two worlds could meet without destroying each other. Years passed. Luke's hair began to silver at the temples. Aiyana's face gained new lines around her eyes from laughter and worry in equal measure. They grew old together in their hidden valley, watching their daughter transform from child to young woman, fierce and proud and capable. But the world, even in its remoteness, has a way of intruding. When Hope was 15, a stranger arrived at their cabin. He was Apache, weathered and ancient, his eyes holding the wisdom of countless seasons. Aiyana recognized him instantly. The tribe's shaman, teacher of her youth. "I have come with news," he said in their language, his voice like wind through dry grass. "Your father is dying. He asks for you." Aiyana felt the words like stones in her chest. She had not spoken to her father in 16 years, had believed that door closed forever. "Why now?" she asked, her voice carefully neutral. "Because dying men see clearly what the living refuse to acknowledge. He understands finally what it cost you to follow your heart. He wishes to meet his granddaughter before the spirits call him home." Aiyana looked at Luke, saw her own conflict mirrored in his eyes. Then she looked at Hope, who stood in the doorway listening with the intensity she brought to everything. Her daughter deserved to know where she came from. All of it, even the parts that hurt. "We will come," Aiyana said. The journey to the Apache village took 5 days. With each mile, Aiyana felt her old life pulling at her, the girl she had been awakening from long sleep. When they finally reached the edge of the encampment, people emerged from their homes, staring at the strange procession, an Apache woman who had become legend, a white man who had stolen her heart, and the child who should not exist. Her father lay in the chief's lodge, his once powerful body reduced to bones and sinew. But his eyes, when they found hers, still burned with the fierce intelligence she remembered. He studied her face for a long moment, then shifted his gaze to Hope, who stood straight and unafraid under his scrutiny. "She has your pride," he said finally, his voice a whisper of its former thunder, "and her father's courage. Come closer, child." Hope approached without hesitation, kneeling beside the old man's pallet. He reached out with a trembling hand and touched her face, tracing the mixed features that marked her as both and neither. "I was wrong," he said, though whether to Hope or Aiyana was unclear. "I thought love had only one face, one color, one acceptable form. I tried to make the world smaller than it is, tried to force my daughter into a shape that would fit my fear." He looked at Aiyana now, tears gathering in his ancient eyes. "Forgive me, my daughter. I cast you out when I should have held you closer. I called your love a betrayal when it was the bravest thing you ever did." Aiyana knelt beside Hope, taking her father's other hand. "There is nothing to forgive, Father. You did what you believed was right, what generations of pain taught you to do." "No." His grip tightened with surprising strength. "There is everything to forgive, but perhaps also everything to learn from. This child, your Hope, she is not pollution. She is possibility. The future, if we are brave enough to meet it." He lived 3 more days, long enough to tell Hope stories of her mother's childhood, of the Apache people, of the land that ran in her blood. Long enough to shake Luke's hand and acknowledge him not as enemy but as family. Long enough to call a council and declare, with the last of his authority, that Aiyana was restored to her people, that Hope was recognized as Apache, and that any who wished to dispute this could challenge his spirit in the afterlife. When he died, he did so peacefully, with his daughter on one side and his granddaughter on the other. The village mourned him with all the ceremony due a great chief, and they did not look away when Aiyana stood beside his funeral pyre, her white husband's arm around her shoulders, their mixed-blood daughter between them. After the funeral, some of the younger warriors approached Luke. They did not offer friendship, exactly, but neither did they offer hostility. Instead, they offered questions, curious about the man who had loved enough to lose everything, who had proved that courage came in forms they had not recognized. One young warrior, barely older than Hope, said to Luke, "You are different than the stories we tell about your people." Luke considered this, then replied, "Perhaps the stories need to change." On both sides. That night, around the communal fire, Hope sang a song she had composed herself, lyrics in both Apache and English, melody drawing from both traditions. Her voice rose clear and strong, and in it Aiyana heard the future her father had spoken of. Not a future where differences disappeared, but one where they could coexist, where bridges could be built from courage and maintained with love. They stayed in the village for 2 weeks, then prepared to return to their hidden valley. But on the morning of their departure, Hope came to her parents with surprising news. "I want to stay," she said. "Not forever, but for a season. I want to learn from the elders, to understand this part of myself more deeply." Aiyana's first instinct was to refuse, to keep her daughter close and safe. But she looked into Hope's determined eyes and saw herself at that age, hungry for knowledge, for identity, for belonging. And she understood that true love meant letting go, trusting that what you had given was enough to keep your child safe even in your absence. "Stay," Aiyana said, though the word cost her. "Learn, grow. We will be here when you are ready to come home." Luke said nothing, but his hand found Aiyana's and squeezed, sharing her pain and her pride in equal measure. They left Hope in the care of the shaman who had brought them together, the old man who promised to teach her the healing arts, the old stories, the wisdom that could not be learned in their isolated valley. And then they rode back toward home, just the two of them for the first time in 16 years. The cabin felt strange without Hope's energy filling it. They moved through their routines in a silence that was no longer comfortable but empty, haunted by absence. Aiyana threw herself into her garden with renewed intensity. Luke spent long hours working on the ranch, expanding it beyond what they needed, trying to fill the void with purpose. One evening, 3 months after Hope's departure, they sat on their porch watching the sunset paint the valley in familiar golds and crimsons. The scene was achingly beautiful and achingly lonely. "Did we do the right thing?" Aiyana asked softly, letting her stay. Luke was quiet for a long moment. "I think we did the only thing." She needed to know both worlds to understand herself. "We gave her one world. Your people are giving her the other. And then she will return and build her own, one that is wholly hers." "You sound very certain." "I sound like a man trying to convince himself he has not lost his daughter." Aiyana laughed, the sound surprising them both. "Honest as always." "It is all I have to offer," he replied, his smile sad but real. "Brutal honesty and mediocre coffee." "The coffee is terrible," Aiyana agreed. "But the honesty I treasure." They sat in comfortable silence as the stars emerged, one by one, ancient lights in an infinite sky. And gradually, the emptiness began to feel less like loss and more like space. Room for them to rediscover each other without the constant demands of parenthood. Room to remember who they had been before they became mother and father, when they were simply two people who had chosen each other against all reason and all odds. That night, in their small cabin under the infinite stars, they made love with a tenderness that was both familiar and new, reconnecting not just physically but spiritually, reminding themselves of the foundation upon which they had built everything else. "I would choose this again," Aiyana whispered in the darkness afterward. "All of it. The pain, the loss, the exile. I would choose it all again if it meant having you." "Even the terrible coffee?" Luke asked, and she heard the smile in his voice. "Even that," she confirmed. "Though I draw the line at your singing." His laugh rumbled through his chest, where her head rested. "Fair enough." They fell asleep twined together, two people who had fought the world and each other and themselves to arrive at this moment of peace. It was not perfect. Their lives had been shaped by too much loss for perfection. But it was real and earned and precious beyond measure. Hope returned 6 months later, riding into the valley at sunset, the light catching her hair and making her glow like something holy. She was changed, deeper somehow, more centered. She had learned the healing songs, the medicinal plants, the prayers that connected Apache people to the earth and sky. But she had also learned something else, something more important. I understand now, she told her parents that night over dinner. Why you chose each other, why you stayed together even when it cost you everything. Love is not about two people being the same. It is about two people choosing to build something new together, something that honors where they came from while creating space for where they are going. Aiyana reached across the table and took her daughter's hand. When did you become so wise? I had good teachers, Hope replied, squeezing back. And I am not finished learning. I want to bring more people here, to our valley. Apache and white, and anyone else who is tired of choosing sides. I want to build a place where mixed families, like ours, are not aberrations, but examples. Luke looked at his daughter with something like awe. That is a dangerous dream. All the best dreams are, Hope replied with a smile that was pure Aiyana. Over the following years, Hope's vision slowly became reality. A few families at first, then more, drawn by word of mouth and desperation. Apache who had married white traders, white women who had fallen in love with Apache warriors, children of mixed heritage who fit nowhere else. They came seeking refuge and found community. The valley transformed. More cabins rose among the trees. Gardens expanded into small farms. Children of every shade played together, learning each other's languages and games, creating their own traditions from the threads of their parents' cultures. It was not perfect. Old prejudices died hard, and conflicts erupted regularly. But they had Aiyana and Luke as their example, proof that differences could be navigated, that love could bridge seemingly impossible divides. And they had Hope, who moved between groups with ease, mediating, teaching, building the future her grandfather had glimpsed in his final days. Aiyana watched her daughter work and felt a pride so fierce it sometimes frightened her. This girl, this impossible child, had taken the pain of her parents' story and transformed it into something healing. She had taken exile and made it into belonging. She had taken a bridge built for two and expanded it to hold dozens, then hundreds. One autumn evening, when the valley blazed with color and the air held the crisp promise of winter, Aiyana and Luke climbed to their favorite ridge to watch the sunset. They were old now, their bodies marked by years of hard work and harder choices. But their hands still fit together perfectly, and their silences still spoke volumes. Below them, the valley bustled with life. Smoke rose from chimneys. Children's laughter echoed off the canyon walls. Hope moved through it all, her figure small but unmistakable, a center of gravity around which their small world turned. Did you ever imagine this? Luke asked. When you pulled me from that flood? Aiyana smiled, remembering the proud, angry woman she had been, so certain she knew how her life would unfold. Never, she admitted. I thought I knew everything. I thought my path was set, my choices made. You were supposed to be an insult, a reminder of everything I hated. And now? She leaned against him, feeling his solidity, his warmth. Now you are my home. Strange how the thing we resist most fiercely often turns out to be exactly what we need. You resisted pretty fiercely, Luke agreed, his tone light but his eyes serious. I thought you might actually kill me that first night. I considered it, Aiyana confessed. But then you made that terrible coffee, and I felt too sorry for you. They laughed together, the sound carrying across the valley, adding to the symphony of life below. And in that moment, Aiyana understood something profound. She had spent her youth fighting to preserve what was, fighting against change, against loss, against the inevitable transformation of the world. But real courage, she now knew, was not in resisting change. It was in choosing how to change, in deciding what to carry forward and what to let go, in building something new from the ruins of the old. She thought of her father, gone now nearly 20 years, and hoped he could see this valley, this community his banishment had inadvertently created. She hoped he knew that his final wisdom had taken root and flourished beyond anything he could have imagined. What are you thinking? Luke asked, reading her silence as he always could. That we did not fail, Aiyana said slowly. When we chose each other, when we kept choosing each other even when it cost us everything, we were not running away from our people. We were running towards something new, something necessary. A bridge, Luke offered. No, Aiyana shook her head. A bridge connects two separate things. What we built, what hope is building, is not a bridge. It is new ground, a place that belongs to itself. Luke considered this, then nodded. New ground, he agreed. I like that. They sat in silence as the sun completed its descent, painting the world in shades of purple and gold. Stars began to emerge, the same stars that had watched over Aiyana's ancestors, over Luke's, over all the peoples who had walked this land. The stars cared nothing for bloodlines or borders. They simply shone, constant and indifferent and beautiful. Do you have any regrets? Luke asked, his voice soft. Aiyana took her time answering, giving the question the weight it deserved. She thought of her father's face when he had cast her out. She thought of the warriors who had called her traitor, the women who had turned their backs. She thought of every moment of fear and pain and uncertainty that had marked their journey. I regret the pain we caused others, she said finally. I regret that our love required such a high price. But the love itself? The choice to walk this path with you? No, never. I would do it all again, pay every price twice over, if it meant arriving here, at this moment with you. Luke pulled her closer, kissing the top of her head. You know what I regret? He asked. What? That I never learned to make good coffee. Aiyana laughed, the sound echoing across the valley, pure and joyful and free. Below, Hope heard her mother's laughter and looked up toward the ridge, seeing the two figures silhouetted against the dying light. She smiled, recognizing the shape of a love that had survived everything the world threw at it, and drew strength from knowing she had been born of such fierce devotion. The years continued their inevitable march. Luke's hair turned completely white. Aiyana's hands grew gnarled with age. They moved slower now, slept longer, let Hope and the younger generation handle more of the daily work. But their love remained constant, a fixed point in a changing world. They had been together 37 years when Luke fell ill. It started as a cough, nothing serious, but it settled in his chest and would not leave. By spring, he could barely walk from the cabin to the porch without stopping to catch his breath. Aiyana made him every remedy she knew, called in every healer in the valley, but nothing helped. Some things, she was learning, love could not fix. I am ready, Luke told her one evening. His breathing labored, but his eyes clear. I've had a good life, better than I deserved. Do not talk like that, Aiyana commanded, but her voice lacked conviction. She could see death hovering at the edges of his vision, patient and inevitable. I need to tell you something, Luke continued, grasping her hand with surprising strength. Something I should have said years ago but was too afraid. What? That day by the river, when I pulled you from the flood? I knew. The moment I saw your face, even terrified and half-drowned, I knew you were going to change my life. I did not know how, did not know the cost or the joy, but I knew nothing would ever be the same. And I was not wrong. Tears streamed down Aiyana's face. Why are you telling me this now? Because I want you to know that every moment, even the hardest ones, was worth it. I have lived more in these years with you than I would have in 100 years of safety. You gave me purpose. You gave me hope. He smiled at his own wordplay. You gave me everything. And what will I do without you? The question came out broken, desperate. You will keep living, Luke said firmly. You will keep building this place. Keep loving our daughter. Keep being the strongest person I have ever known. And sometimes, when the sunset is particularly beautiful, you will remember the cowboy who was foolish enough to love you. I could never forget, Aiyana whispered. Even if I wanted to, I could never forget. Luke died 3 days later, in the early morning when the world hung balanced between darkness and light, just as their daughter had been born. He went peacefully, Aiyana holding one hand and Hope the other, surrounded by love and family and everything they had built together. They buried him on the ridge where they had spent so many evenings watching the sunset. The entire valley attended, Apache and white and mixed blood all standing together, honoring a man who had proven that love was stronger than hate, that choice mattered more than blood. Aiyana stood at the grave long after everyone else had left, staring at the freshly turned earth. She felt hollow, scraped out, as though half her soul had been buried with him. She had spent 40 years learning to be part of a pair, and now she had to remember how to be singular again. But she was not alone. Hope stood beside her, solid and certain, and around them the valley continued its rhythms. The life they had created together going on because that was what life did. It went on. Tell me about the beginning, Hope said softly. About the flood and the storm and how you fell in love with the man you swore to hate. So Aiyana told the story, as she would tell it many times in the years to come. She told it to honor Luke's memory, to keep his spirit alive in words and remembrance. But she also told it because the story belonged not just to them, but to everyone in the valley, proof that the impossible could become real if you were brave enough to reach for it. She lived for 10 more years after Luke's death, years marked by both sorrow and joy. She watched Hope marry a man of mixed heritage like herself, a gentle soul who loved her daughter with the same fierce devotion Luke had shown Aiyana. She held her grandchildren, marveling at how far they had come, how much had changed in a single lifetime. The valley continued to grow, becoming known throughout the territories as a place of sanctuary, where people of different worlds could find common ground. It was never perfect, never easy, but it endured, built on the foundation two unlikely lovers had laid decades before. On her final day, Aiyana asked to be carried to the ridge beside Luke's grave. Hope sat with her as the sun began its descent, painting the sky in those familiar golds and crimsons that had witnessed so much of her life. I am ready to go to him, Aiyana said, her voice weak but content. We have been apart too long. He would be so proud, Hope said through her tears. Of you, of me, of everything we built. We built it together, Aiyana corrected. All of us. That is what he understood, what he tried to teach me. We are stronger together than apart. All of us, no matter where we come from. She closed her eyes, letting the sunset's warmth wash over her face one last time, and in her mind, she was young again, riding through the grasslands with the wind in her hair. She was proud and fierce and certain of everything. And then she fell, pulled under by the flood, and strong hands grabbed her, and a voice said, I have got you. She had fought against those hands at first, had resented being saved, but gradually, slowly, she had learned to trust them. Had learned that sometimes the thing you resist most fiercely is exactly what you need. Had learned that love does not ask permission or wait for the right moment. It simply arrives, like a flood, like a storm, and changes everything. Aiyana thought of all the years she had wasted being angry, being proud, being certain. And then she thought of all the years she had spent being loved, being challenged, being transformed. Both were necessary. She understood now. You had to know who you were before you could become who you were meant to be. She was no longer the woman who had laughed at the idea of loving a cowboy. But neither had that woman died. She had simply grown, expanded, become more than she had imagined possible. And that growth, painful as it had been, was the greatest gift Luke had given her. The sun touched the horizon, spilling gold across the valley. Aiyana felt herself slipping, the edges of the world growing soft and indistinct. But she was not afraid. She had faced too much in her life to fear death. Besides, Luke was waiting, somewhere beyond the sunset, with that patient smile and those understanding eyes. Her last thought, as the world faded to light, was of laughter. Not the cruel laughter of her youth, but the joyous laughter of her later years, the kind that came from deep joy and hard-won wisdom. She had laughed at love once, had mocked it as weakness, as surrender. But she had been wrong. Love was not weakness. It was the strongest thing in the world, strong enough to bridge chasms, to weather storms, to transform two people who should have been enemies into something more beautiful than either could have been alone. And so Aiyana went into the dark with a smile on her lips and peace in her heart, knowing that she had lived fully, loved deeply, and left behind something worth remembering. The proud Apache woman who had laughed at the idea of loving a cowboy had become the wise elder who understood that sometimes laughter turns to tears, tears to understanding, and understanding to a love that transcends every boundary the world tries to impose. Below, In the valley that was her legacy, life continued. Children played in the fading light. Smoke rose from chimneys. Hope stood at her mother's grave and promised to carry forward the story, to ensure that future generations understood the price and the possibility of choosing love over fear. The stars emerged, one by one, eternal witnesses to human folly and human courage. And somewhere, in a place beyond language and understanding, two spirits found each other again, no longer divided by culture or color, finally free to be simply what they had always been, two people who had found each other against all odds and refused to let go, even when the whole world demanded it.